I was very happy where I was, and suddenly I was called. We had to sell our house. That's when we moved to Maui. It's like we had sold our house. We thought we were moving to Maui. I didn't know what I was being called to. I know I was being called. We thought we were going to set up a spiritual center on Maui. That's what we thought it was. But really what it was selling the house, cutting all obligations, being free to just take off. Didn't know that. It was just a call. And when I went in, it wasn't like, okay, I have to go. Where are you going to go? I don't know. Who are you going to find? I don't know. I knew I was teaching the Enneagram, so I wanted to, if I could find Sufi teachers who knew the Enneagram more than I could, I'd do that. And if I could find someone more awake, that's what I wanted. And so I wasn't even going to India. I just landed in India to get a visa to go to Pakistan, because I was going to look for Sufis in Pakistan. And I was going to go to Sikkim, because I'd had a transmission from Jagmohan Kontrol, who was this Tibetan Buddhist who'd come to Maui, and he was clearly awake. The first one I'd seen of that group that was really transmitted awakeness. And I remember after I received this transmission from him, I was with Gangaji. I was laughing so hard. I fell off my chair onto the floor. She was afraid I was going to die because I couldn't breathe. I was laughing so hard. So anyway, I went to Delhi to get visas to go to Sikkim and to go to Pakistan. I didn't want to go to India. Wasn't going looking for gurus. And when I landed in Delhi for the first time, I was in this little inn, and the guy said, "Hey, there are Sufis right down the road. There's a little Sufi village." And so my first day in India, I went down to this little Sufi village, which was like going back in time. It was like going back to the 16th century, this little mud-walled village right outside of Delhi, in Delhi actually, but on the outskirts, called Nizamuddin. And I went to Nizamuddin, I went to the Sufi shrine of this Saint Nizamuddin, and I prayed for liberation, prayed for a final teacher. And then I went to eat at this Kareem's, a little restaurant off the mosque, and I was waiting to be served when a man walked in and sat down, and the waiter waited on him first. And, hey, I'm a New York Jew. You don't... Come on, I'm sitting here. Hey, I didn't say anything, but he felt the energy. And he turned around, his back was towards me, he turned around, looked at me and said, "I will pay for whatever this gentleman is having." He said, "Can I join you?" I said, "Sure." And it turns out he was a government minister who was only in town for the day, and his sister wrote books on the Sufis, and he knew all the enlightened Sufis. Incredible. My first day, And so he drove me back to my place in his little chauffeur-driven car with little flags on it, and he gave me a list of Sufis, and he said he had more back home. So while I'm waiting for my visas to come through, because it takes a long time for the visas to come through to Pakistan and Sikkim, I went out and visited these Sufis. I met the head of the Naqshbandi Sufis in Old Delhi and the head of the Chisti Sufis in his little Gangetic towns. I went out and met all these Sufis, but none of them were awake that I could see. None of them knew the Enneagram. And so I still had some time. I would go visit him. He was in Lucknow. And so I went to Lucknow and to get names of more Sufis. And while I was there, I knew there was this teacher in Lucknow because I'd met one of his students. I didn't know his name and I didn't know how to find him, but I knew he was there. And so I went on my roof of my hotel and I prayed for a sign. And I saw the sign. It was actually 2 Indian kites, but I didn't know they were kites. Indian kites are very different from in the US. They don't have tails and they're square. And I just saw, looked like a little piece of garbage, like a little black piece of garbage floating up. They float up on air, hot air, and then another little red one came up and they started dancing together right after my prayer. And I knew that's where he lives. I've got to get over there, And I called back to the States, which is like, at that point, it was like maybe a 6-hour ordeal to get on the phone, a really bad connection and hard. And I called my wife and said, get the name of this guy. And so we found his name in the book that one of his students had written, and Punja. And I looked for Punja in the phone book, and the P's were torn out. And I had to find another place, and then there was a Punja in the phone book, and it turns out that's where it was, that spot. And so I made my way over there with the phone book thing and knocked on the door, and this sweet man answers the door and says, "He's waiting for you. Come on in." And so I got taken in and taken up through this little house upstairs. He was sitting on his bed, and he had me sit on his bed with him. And he said, "Why are you here?" I said, "I'm ready to wake up." And he laughed and he hit me, and and it was done. It was done. And so that I needed that. I didn't know where or what. It wasn't mental. It was just I was called. It was a mystery. And just then spend all this time with him alone. We'd go for walks together, holding hands. I never held hands with a man before. Oh, this 80-year-old man with these big hands and just walking. His granddaughters would cook for us, cook all the meals for us, and chapatis. And I'm probably the only one who ever went to India and gained 20 kilos. Oh my God, it was. Oh, I just couldn't stop. And then when he'd finish his food, he'd pour it into my plate. And I was, And then we were alone for maybe 4 days. And then he got a letter. People want to come visit him. He would read his mail in his room. His bedroom was room for a bed and a chair and a little space in front of the chair. And he'd sit in his chair and read his mail, and I'd sit at his feet. And he'd say, "Oh, there's some people who've written. They're in Varanasi. They want to come visit me." I said, "Oh no, don't please, don't don't let them." But they came, and so he had me. I became his his assistant, and I would meet them and take them and show them how to get there and take care of them, serve tea, and it eventually grew to there were maybe 6 or 8 or 9 of us there, and then he'd have satsang twice a day, and it was most I've never and he would test me in different ways. Like my mind after 3 days with him, I said, so how do I how do I stop the mind? He said, "Well, do you have any thoughts now?" I said, "No, just blissful." I said, "Okay, watch a thought start to arise." And I looked down, and I could see like a bubble starting to come up. He said, "Don't touch it." And I didn't, and it sank back down. He said, "No, that's vigilance." And so mine stopped. Just day after day of deepening bliss and silence. And he would test it. So I was serving tea and crackers to people, and then I came around to pick up the cups, and someone hadn't finished their tea, and they said, "No, they'll keep it." Okay, and as I started to leave, he said, "Why didn't you take their cup?" Oh, it was so good. There was no thought. There was no reaction. I knew what he was doing, and it was so beautiful. I loved it. And so the 8th fixation would be, "What do you mean? Why did I pick up their cup? Hey, But it was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Please let me get your cup." Ah. So then, after I was with him, I don't know how many weeks, he was sending me back to do satsang, and I said, "No, actually my wife's the Sakguru. You have to meet my wife." And he says, "Oh, 2 of you, that's very unusual." I said, "But my wife is not a yogi. She's a goddess. I have to find the best place possible for her. I can't just bring her here like this." And so we took a train together. We took a 2nd-class sleeper to Hardwar, where he would get his rooms when the warmer weather came. And we went there together to find the suitable place for my wife. And I found what was the best at the time, a tourist bungalow, and went back to the U.S. to bring her. And so he was waiting at the banks of the Ganga when she arrived, and that's what he gave her the name Gangaji. He said she had the purity, the nobility, and the sattvic nature to take this transmission to the West. And it's so true. And then a couple of years later, he wrote to me again saying, you should do satsang in these different places. And I said, I'm not in competition with Gangaji. It's like, I'm here to support her satsang. I was her first devotee. And I set up her satsangs for a number of years until the Gangaji Foundation started. And he asked me a third time, and I said yes. That was, I don't know when, but it started. So, it's time for all of us. It's his transmission. It's Ramana's transmission that's being passed on. When I met Papaji, I'd never seen people walk in the door, be given freedom. No practice, no rules, no prerequisites, just when you're here, wake up. Human incarnation is enough. And it's like, wow, so rare. So rare. Never seen it before. And now, through his grace, it's all over the world. Satsang is everywhere. Satsang is happening all over the world. And that's since 1990, So, 20 years. How fast? So another 20 years, another 40 years, who knows, It's lighting up. It's spreading heart to heart.